Yeah, dear learners, this is the third unit of the political cultures, and that is the critics of the political cultures. Here I am going to discuss about the critics that is related to the political cultures. The concept of political cultures, widely influential in the political science, has also faced significant criticisms over the years. Critics have raised various concerns about its theoretical foundations, methodological challenges, and practical implications. Below is a detailed examination of the key criticisms of the concept of the cultures. That means when we talking about the critics of the political cultures, and we have the different concerns about the theoretical foundations, methodological challenges, and practical implications, and all things will go in details one by one. Now come to the first importance ambiguity or critics of the political cultures, that is vagueness and ambiguity. First important thing that is lack of clear definitions. That means when we talking about the political cultures, this is not very clear. One of the main criticism is that political cultures is often defined too broadly and too vaguely. Critics argue that concept can be so inclusive that it's become difficult to distinguish from the other social or cultural phenomena, making it less useful as an analytical tool. That means the political culture has not defined in the veiled manners, and there is some kind of the vagueness and ambiguity. Second important things of critics of the political cultures, that is ambiguous boundary. The boundary of what constitutes political cultures are often unclear. For example, it is challenging to differentiate between the what is purely cultural and what is a result of political institutions or social structures. This ambiguity makes it difficult to apply the concept consistently across the different study. It is very important part that is political cultures have some kind of the ambiguous boundary, and the boundary of what constitutes political cultures are often unclear, and it's challenging the differentiate between what is purely cultures and what is the result of political institutions and the social structures. This ambiguity makes it difficult to apply the concept consistently across different study. Next important thing, that is determinism and reductionisms. Critics of political cultures. Determinisms. Critics argue that the concept of political cultures can lead to cultural determinisms where political outcomes are overly attributed to cultural factors, ignoring other important influence such as economic conditions, institutional arrangements, or historical contingency. This is very important part of the critics. Next is that is reductionism. By focusing on cultural explanations, political cultural theory can sometimes reduce complex political phenomena to simply cultural factors, ignoring the multifaceted natures of political life. This reductionism can be oversimplify the relationship between the cultures and the politics. This is very important parts of the cultural relationship. Now come to the next point of the critics of political cultures, that is aesthetics and ahistorical natures. Resistant to the change, political culture is often criticized for being portrayed as aesthetics and resistant to change. Critics argue that if it fails to adequately account for how political cultures evolve over the times, especially in response to social, economics, and political developments. Second important thing, that is ahistorical approach. When we're talking about the ahistorical approach, some some critics point out that the concept of political cultures tend to overlook the historical context in which political systems and culture develop. By focusing on the current cultural attitude, it may ignore the historical process that shaped those attitudes. It is very important parts of the critics. Now come to the next important things, that is meteorological challenges. When we're talking about the meteorological challenges, that is measurements problems. One of the significant challenges in studying political cultures is how to measure it. Critics argue that measuring cultural attitude, beliefs, and the value is inherently difficult as there is often subjective and not easily quantifiable. Survey and interview common methods used to gauge political culture may not be captured the full complexity of cultural phenomena. That means this is the very methodological challenge of the political culture. How can we measure the political cultures? This is the not there is any kind of the methods, and these are the subjective methods, not these are the objective method. Survey and interview, common method used to gauge the political cultures, may not be captured the full complexity of the culture phenomena. That means when we try to study and try to exaggerate the knowledge, we are using the survey and interview, and these are the very common methods. Next important challenge before the political culture, that is comparative study. When comparing political culture across different society, methodological challenges become even more pronounced. Cultural concept may not translate well across different contexts, leading to difficulty in making valid across cultural comparisons. This is also important part of the critics. Next important thing, that is ethnocentrism and biasness, Western's biasness. Some critics argue that the concept of political cultures is rooted in Western political thoughts and may not be applicable to non-Western society. For example, the emphasis on individualism, democracy, and civic participations often reflect Western's value, which may not resonate in cultures with different political traditions. These are the very important part of ethnocentrism. Next is that is the cultural biasness. We are talking the interpretations of political cultures can be influenced by the researcher's own cultural backgrounds, leading to biasness or ethnocentric conclusions. This biasness can result in the impositions of one culture value and norms on another, misinterpreting or misrepresenting the later political cultures. These are the very important challenges before all the things. Now come to the overemphasis on the stability, and this is also critics of the political cultures. Neglect of conflicts. That means when we're talking about the political culture theory, is often criticized for the emphasizing stability and consciousness while neglecting the conflicts and changes. Critics argue that by focusing on shared value and norms, political cultures can overlook the significant role of political conflicts, power struggle, and social movement in shaping political system. These are the very important parts of the neglecting of these things. Now come to the conservative biasness. The focus on stability can also lead to a conservative biasness where existing power structures and social orders are seen as natural and desirable. This can prevent a critical examinations of how political cultures may be perpetuate or inequality or injustice. These are the very important parts of all the things. Now come to the next slides of the political cultures critics, that is circular reasonings and tautology. When we're talking about the casual ambiguity, critics point out that explanations based on political cultures can sometimes be tautological. For example, saying that a society is democratic because it has a democratic political cultures, and then explaining the democratic cultures each as the reasons for democracy can create a circular ambiguity that does not truly explain anything. This is also important parts. Now come to the causal directions. When we're talking about the causal directions, that there is often ambiguity about the whether political cultures shape political institutions or vice versa. Critics argue that without clear causal mechanisms, it is challenging to determining whether cultural influence politics or if political structures and events shape cultural attitudes. These are very important parts and all the things. Now come to the next critics of the political cultures, that is neglect of structural factors. Institutional factors, some scholars argue that political culture theory underestimate the role of political institutions in shaping political behaviors. They suggest that institutions rather than cultures are the primary drivers of political outcomes and that cultural explanations can observe the importance of institutions, dignitaries, and the performance. Next is that is called the economic determinants. Similarly, economic factors are often overlooked in political culture analysis. Critics argue that economic conditions, class, structures, and material interests can have a more direct and significant impacts on political behavior than cultural value and all the things. This is also important parts of all the things. Now come to the next critics of the political cultures, that is difficulty in predicting of political outcomes. When we're talking about the lack of predictivity powers, this is also important. Political cultures is often criticized for its limited ability to predict a specific political outcomes. While it may be explained general tendency or patterns, it often fails to account for particular political events or shift, especially in times of crisis or rapid changes. Contingency and the complexity. Critics argue that political cultures is only one factor among many other influences or political outcomes. The complexity of political life means that cultures alone cannot be reliable predicates how political systems will evolve and how peoples will behave in a particular situations. These are the very important critics of the political cultures, that is lack of predictive powers and contingency and the complexity. Next important things that each critics of political cultures is overgeneralizations. When we're talking about the overgeneralizations, that means homogenizations of diverse cultures. Political culture theory often assumes a degree of homogeneity within the society, overlooking the diversity of subcultures and conflicting value that can exist. This can lead to overgeneralizations that fails to capture the true complexity of a society political life. This is very important parts. Next is that is called the ignoring regional and local variations. Critics argue that political cultures, all analysis can overlook important regional, local, or group specific variations. For example, political cultures may differ significantly between urban and rural area or among different ethnic or social groups within the country. So these are the some important critics of the political cultures. And last one, that is overgeneralizations. That means key thinkers, political scientists, they are generalizing or overgeneralizing the political cultures through the homogenizations of diverse cultures, and political culture theory can often assumes a degree of homogeneity within a society, overlooking the diversity of subcultures and conflicting a society, overlooking the diversity of subcultures and conflicting value that can exist. This can lead to overgeneralizations that fail to capture the true complexity of a society or political lives. Next is that is called ignoring regional and local variations. Critics argue that political cultures analysis can overlook important regional, local groups, specific variations. For example, political cultures may differ significantly between urban and rural area or among different ethnic or social group within the country. Next, about the political cultures, that is the conclusions. And here I am going to conclude about the critics of the political cultures. While the political concept of political cultures has been instrumental in shaping our understandings of political system. it is not without its critics. The criticisms highlights the challenge of defining, measuring, and applying the concept in a meaningful way. They also underscore the importance of considering other factors such as institutions, economics, and history when analyzing the political phenomena. Despite these critics, political cultures remains a valuable concept, particularly while used in a conjunction with the other analytical tools to provide a more comprehensive understandings of political life. These are the concluding part of the critiques of the political cultures. Thank you for hearing the lectures. This is very important parts of the competitive government and politics, that is political cultures. I giving the detailed lectures on the critiques of the political cultures. Thanks once again for hearing the lectures. Thank you.